Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Druid High Performance podcast. This is the podcast for Druid High Performance, self-development consultancy for the modern world. Here we are to talk about performance, longevity, health and empowerment, self-development and all that entails. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. We're going from strength to strength here. We've got short videos, we've got podcasts, and it's all around this area of self-development. In this modern world, we have some particular challenges that we're all facing, I feel, and this is the place where we discuss those things. We explore the benefits of 3 key areas. On the first 3 podcasts, we looked at Qigong and the area of longevity. We looked at mobility. We looked at posture. We looked at breath regulation. In the second of 3 podcasts together, this would be 4, 5 and 6, we looked at performance psychology. We looked at focus, we looked at effective goal setting, and we looked at confidence. Now we're moving into a slightly different realm, and that is we're looking at martial arts. We're looking at the physical benefits of martial arts, plus we'll talk about the psychological benefits too. I mean, there's lots of things that we can choose to do as something to empower our body, forms of exercise, forms of discipline that we can draw benefit from in this modern world. Now, my background's in martial arts, so I'm a big advocate of martial arts. So this, I feel, is the best form of physical self-development because I think it gives you so much. This is a little bit about what we're going to be talking today. We'll be talking specifically about movement. Now, movement in itself is there's a lot of benefits that we can draw from movement, as we're going to get into, but also movement specific to martial arts, because you'll find that a lot of people training in martial arts, or they watch fights or whatever, they focus more on the punching and the kicking of the martial arts techniques that they're looking at. But for me, the movements in between those are where the important stuff really lies. But anyway, before we get too far ahead there, Druid High Performance is a self-development company, and here we look to help people sharpen up their focus and cut down their physical pain and their negative emotion, be that stress, be that anxiety. Focus is very key to what we do, and this is what we aim to do. We aim to help people perform at their best, both in the office, both at home and in the office. And we help to get people to rediscover what it was like to be a kid when we were more active, we were more physical, whereas now most people in their adult life, as they approach their 40s, they sit still most of the time. They're looking at a screen and they're not out there doing the damn thing, moving up and down, getting the benefits of being physically active. So in the very first podcast, we looked at mobility, which was specifically mobilizing specific joints, big and small. Whereas movement and mobility are very similar in sound and you might think in scope, what we're looking at today is slightly different. Movement exists more in the macro, more broader context. Mobility, as I say, it's more specific to a joint or a collection of joints, whereas movement is the whole body moving. So we'll be discussing movement in several different ways, exploring the benefits of movement on the body and the mind in this era of sedentary living, as I mentioned. We will discuss the idea of movement as therapy and its effect on well-being. If the majority of the population aren't moving enough, then there's a great therapeutic effect for movement. Also, we will look at the importance of competence and how learning a form of movement allows us to explore and grow as we improve competence. I mean, this can be in any discipline you like, really, but we like to improve at things, human beings. We can improve at things like playing a computer game or reading or learning about different topics. But, we like to improve, as I say, but there's great value in learning and to improve at a physical discipline, which is movement-based. Finally, we'll discuss movement related to martial arts specifically, as this is the framework that I have spent most time studying, and I feel it is a rich subject to explore. So why is it important? Why bother talking about movement? Well, movement feels good. Learning new movements feels good. Being able to perform a complex movement competently after practicing it also feels good. It's not something so many people are used to nowadays because as we get older, we kind of lose touch with that. But if you observe children, they'll learn something new, a new way of moving, climbing up onto something a little bit higher than they were able to do previously, or learning how to operate some simple toy, some simple mechanism. They're constantly trying to achieve this thing and they're looking to improve at it. And they get a real boost when they do. Now, as I mentioned a lot in these podcasts, too much of our lives today is spent sedentary. It robs us of a lot of positive emotion because it feels good to move. So increased competence is linked with self-esteem. That leads to self-mastery. See, it's my view that people of all ages need to move to help maintain their body and their mind and the sense of well-being. So who can most benefit from movement? Well, people that spend most of their day sat down can really benefit from learning new movements. Children require movement patterns to develop their capacity of thought and function, starting with basic forms to ever more complex patterns. Confidence and movement mastery seems to have some link. So the opposite is also true. People low in confidence as they age tend to become more static, especially in this world of smartphones and internet. They kind of withdraw into themselves, and as we'll mention later on, if you're withdrawn into yourself and you're not moving too much, this is sort of what we see in depressed people. We'll talk about that a bit more in detail later. Finally, people that are recovering from injury or inactivity can use movement learning as a precursor for exercise. There's a difference between movements per se and exercise. And there's been a lot of research into exercise and the benefits on that, but it's not exactly clear if it's the movement that's benefiting the people or it's the physical exercise. But as I say, we'll discuss that a bit more detailed as we go. So what we're going to start with is looking at movement and child development. So we're going to start quite broad and we're going to move forward from there. So if any of you out there are parents, it's quite interesting to observe your child learn more and more complex movements as they get older. So movement teaches us the core fundamentals of balance and coordination as a child. And these are the building blocks that a children learns in early life. It's things that we don't think about as adults, but we had to build this up in our early life. So movement is central to our development. Before we can think, reason, imagine, or speak, we move. And these movements are very low resolution, clumsy and ill-formed. We build up our itinerary of movements into a complex web of interrelated schemas, frames. See, it's theorized that around 4 months the child connects pleasure with moving. This is when they first begin to play. You know, we never stop playing. They reckon it starts around this 4-month time frame. And since becoming a parent, as I say, it's really interesting to observe my child. When she learns something new, she's like, you know, Daddy, I did it. Well done. Give her a pat on the back, a bit of encouragement, lights her up, you know, and then she's on to the next one. And for me, the vast majority, if not all of us, are like that, or were in our youth. And maybe a lot of us get away from that as we get older, but it's there dormant underneath. You know, we just need to kind of pull that out. See, if kids do not get this opportunity in early life, they are hindered in their development, psychologically as well as physically. So kids like to copy others, learn more and more complex movement patterns. I mean, they love it. It's something we all loved as a child. As we get older, it seems we get distracted by new toys, which can stultify our growth. We get distracted from watching other people do things, you know. How many people out there, they watch football or whatever sport it is 2 or 3 times a week, but they're not moving, they're not doing anything, you know, and they're spending a lot of their time just observing other people doing things. So how can people get started? So picking a discipline is the first step. I mean, when you sit back and look at it from a bird's eye view, we human beings we've really learned and mastered so many forms of movement. It's quite incredible. We have hundreds to choose from. It's recommended to seek instruction in an area where you have some interest, some basic interest, So we got, swimming, climbing, dancing, martial arts is my particular forte, bike riding, skating, the list goes on. Goes on and on. I mean, women tend to really like dancing. The vast majority of women really like to dance. It comes very naturally. But as ladies get older, some of them, they don't dance as much. They like to learn new routines, but maybe dancing's not for you. Find something that you enjoy. So if you don't move enough, pick an area and get learning. So improving in a movement discipline is massively rewarding emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Just like that 6-month kid learning to crawl. You cannot stop that child crawling because they want to learn. They want to keep improving. So in my research for this podcast, we've been looking at different things. Now, there is such a thing as dance/movement therapy. This is quite an interesting topic. The idea of dance acting as therapy goes back thousands of years. There's obviously a lot of cultural influence on dance. Different parts of the world, they dance in different ways, but dance is pretty universal. So dance/movement therapy is designed as the use of movement as a process which furthers physical and emotional integration of an individual. Movement is linked with emotion. This is one of the key ideas. We like to move. If we don't move, we can kind of get a bit low in our mood. We can get a bit down, a bit antsy. When I first moved to London, I remember spending all day on one of them messengers. This is pre-WhatsApp, pre-BlackBerry Messenger. It was on the desktop computer. And I spent all day just messaging back and forth to people. Like a full day. I remember when I kind of logged off, I just felt like empty. Like I'd just been eating sugar or something. There was nothing of substance underneath it. Because I just sat there. And so all that kind of back and forth chat and banter really just kind of fell away, and there was nothing after it. I kind of felt a bit hollow because I hadn't moved all day. And so in looking into the literature on dance movement therapy, there was a meta-analysis as well. They looked at lots and lots of different studies. What they found was the meta-analytical approach. They looked at its efficacy on different adult and children population. And what they found was that the dance movement therapy appears to have therapeutic value for non-clinical people. That's people not experiencing clinical problems. It's the vast amount of us who aren't clinically depressed or clinically anxious or so on. Sort of your average people. They have a therapeutic effect from this dance movement therapy. So quantitative evidence has been shown in the improvement of psychological variables such as depression, anxiety, body attitude, self-acceptance, integration of movement and anxiety. In addition, using dance movement therapy in conjunction with traditional psychotherapy has been shown to boost the effectiveness of the latter. So that's in the quote-unquote normal population. In the elderly, dance movement therapy is shown to be effective in boosting memory, alertness, judgment, stability, and self-esteem while decreasing anxiety. So however static people are in the general population, the people which are in the older population, they're even more static. And self-efficacy is confidence related to a specific task. We start to lose confidence in our ability to move, to do this, to do that. So, that's not me. I can't do that. I can't do this. Or I've got my bad ankle, my bad knee. I can't do this. I can't do that. And once you start to feel like you can't do something, you kind of pull back, spend more time sat down, and then your problems start to build up and build up. Self-esteem, as I say, it starts to go down. And any time you're kind of pushed into doing something a bit more active, you get a bit anxious. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's 3 broad categories of measurable outcomes were identified. So these are body awareness, movement analyses, and psychological change. So how they describe body awareness, so this is spatial awareness, body image, spatial orientation, body concept, and body scheme. How we perceive the body, because if we're not moving, our body, we just kind of lose contact with our body. It's just a big lump sitting around. We're not really doing anything with it. The more we move, we're more aware of what our body can and can't do. The structure of the body, how that relates to our hips, our legs. This is something I haven't had to worry about too much because I'm very in this world of Qigong and martial arts and so on. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't have that same connection. the neuromuscular connection, that connection between mind and body, brain and the muscles linked to specific parts of the body. So the second section is movement analysis, measures of change of general body movement, interactional movement, fine motor skills, agility, coordination, endurance and balance. So fine motor skills, that's a very key one because years ago I used to teach old ladies down at Age Concern, and I would have them do things with their hands such as pick up coins in different ways, because a lot of that fine motor skills they had lost because a lot of the inventions and the tools that we have in and around the house means that we don't have to use these fine motor skills. All these tools make it a little bit easier for us, so we don't have to put so much into this. But then we pay the price. If you take someone who used to dance or do gymnastics as a young person, they might have stopped doing that training, but they kind of have inbuilt in them a certain grace of movement, coordination and agility. If you never had that training, and by the time you're 70, 80 years old, your body's really on the way out, and you have no real way of analyzing or tracking that movement. And once you get past a certain age, you're not going to get it back, unfortunately. It's just how it is. The final element is the psychological variables. Included is anxiety, fatigue, self-esteem, trust, depression, friendliness, and anger. So, dance movement therapy produces the greatest change in anxiety, perhaps because of its positive effects on muscle relaxation. If we're sat around all the time, it's very easy to be tense, because to work out that tension, the body has to move. Changes in body awareness have been widely studied using dance movement therapy. One study saw subjects see their bodies as more graceful, fast, active, strong, and beautiful due to dance movement therapy. A further study saw an increase in knowledge of the body's size, shape, and components is also affected. The average effect of dance movement therapy on such variables is moderate, however. So one of the interesting parts of the research I was looking into was one of the outcomes in some of these papers, they had people draw representations of themselves. Now, the more active you are and the more coordinated you are, when it comes to drawing yourself, that's more articulated. Because if you're very limited in your motion and movements, then we don't tend to think of ourselves when we're that limited as that complicated of a system, I suppose. Whereas if you're someone who, as I say, if you're a gymnast in your youth and you were doing flips this way and that way, you were doing handstands, the articulation in your body and how that represents and maps onto your mind is going to be very different for someone who's just largely been inactive all their life. I found that quite an interesting way of measuring those things, and there was one study where that's what they looked at. They had people draw themselves beginning of the program before it started and then after, and that was the measure. And dance movement therapy had an effect because, as I say, the more you move and the more you use your body, you become more aware, and you're like, hang on a minute, I've got this great bit of kit. So I've got a video I did earlier, talking about this great bit of kit we all have, wonder of nature. We've got this absolute Rolls Royce of a piece of kit here, and most people don't do anything with it. And it's, a bit of a tragedy really, but so improvement in anxiety due to dance movement therapy has been reported and is confirmed by meta-analyses. So this is when they look at many, many studies together. So one of the things they pointed out is improvement in anxiety due to dance movement therapy is reported and is confirmed by meta-analysis studies. However, because the measure of a pre-test anxiety itself can raise anxiety, there is some argument that dance movement therapy improves state anxiety rather than trait anxiety. So what does that mean? Well, state anxiety is anxiety which is linked to an event, something which, your general level of anxiety is called trait, where state anxiety is more specific to an event. So what they're saying is taking a test for some people makes them anxious. So the measure of pre-test anxiety itself can raise anxiety. So there is some argument, as I say, that dance movement therapy improves state anxiety, as in you get more used to dealing with these individual events. It doesn't have a reduction in overall anxiety. So whenever we're looking at evidence, you always kind of question, is there something else going on here? And this is one thing they bring up in the research. So dance movement therapy is beneficial for anxiety. Is it overall, or is it specific to this set event? So the existing research supports dance movement therapy as an effective treatment for anxiety in particular. Now it seems to me, going back to that idea, as I mentioned years ago when I was online all the time, you get very stuck in your head if you don't move. You're all up in your head there, you're thinking about this, you're thinking about that. Because once we start to move, our normal sort of day-to-day systems come on. And so once we've moved around for an hour or so, we go for a walk, or we do some, we go to a dance class, we go to do a martial arts class, we go and do whatever it is, we go and move around, we get out of our head. All this, and we're thinking more about how we're moving through space, which is a very natural thing. Our ancestors did that forever, whereas now here we are stuck with these screens and this endless information in front of us. It's a very unnatural environment that we exist in today, and that seems to lend itself towards anxiety. So when we start to move, our automatic systems come on, we start to get out of our heads a little bit, and now we're moving around, and we're not thinking about what we're doing so much, we're just getting on with it. So moving on, psychological and physical improvements have been attributed to dance movement therapy and can be categorized into 5 areas. So these are 5 areas of improvement related to this dance movement therapy. So 1, re-socialization and integration with a larger group. So if we're spending a lot of time at home obviously with COVID these last couple of years, people have been stuck inside. Some people have families, some people are living with housemates, some people, they're alone. Or if you are with housemates, maybe you're not getting on with them now so much. It's nice to reintegrate with a larger group, meeting new friends, you're all there to do the same thing. This is how a lot of friendships begin and last for a long time. You've got your friends here, your friends there. So that's one aspect. Number 2 is non-verbal creative expression for emotional expression. Being able to get out there and move around. Creative expression. How often do most people get to express themselves non-verbally? Acting out in a certain way related to emotion. Now obviously this is coming from dance movement therapy, but the reason I've added this is because when you do martial arts forms or shadow boxing, that is a form of self-expression. You're learning to move, you'll do it in different ways. You'll be relaxed, have more intention in other areas. With dance, you could represent different emotions and so on. You get to act that out. We don't get to act that out when you're not moving. When you're sat down watching other people do it, other people watch TV these days, Getting out there and expressing yourself, that's an important part of being a human being. Number 3 is total self and body awareness and enhanced self-esteem. Body awareness. Rolling around, doing some just gymnastic techniques, cartwheels. Kids love that stuff, don't they? Well, we do too, Seeing ourselves improve these things. It links to our self-esteem because we've learned to do something new. How many people out there can say to themselves they've learned a new physical act in the last 6 months? Because this happened all the time when we were kids, but as we get older, those gaps get longer and longer, and sometimes as we start to get on the higher age bracket, we start to slow down. We're not learning new things. Our self-esteem is, going the opposite way. So enhanced body awareness. Because we've got the same body. Oh, I didn't realise I could do that. I didn't realise my shoulder could rotate this way, and so on and so forth. Next one is muscular coordination, broader movement capabilities. So when you're doing form work or doing a certain move, it's going to take different types of muscle contraction at different times for it to work. For a time you might not be able to do it. Remember when I was at Kung Fu, the old flip up off, you're laying on the ground, you bring your legs up and you kick up onto your feet. You wouldn't believe how long that took me. You know, you watch the old Jackie Chan movies and whatever, they're flipping up here, flipping up there. Well, one of my things I had to do was for one of my gradings was to do that flip up. And it took me ages. And what is it? It's muscle coordination. And the funny thing is I could have done it, but I wasn't able to coordinate that activity to get the result I needed. And so I did it over and over and over again. And eventually I did it, and I've got to tell you, that feeling was great, amazing. Then you're like, what next? What next? The beautiful thing about Kung Fu is there's so many of those sorts of movements to learn in these four, especially like monkey style stuff. It's like very gymnastic, rolling, flipping, all that stuff. Very coordinated, and yes, muscular coordination, contracting things at the right time. Final one is tension release. We talked about this a little bit already. And enjoyment through relaxation, because movement helps us release tension. You wouldn't believe it, but a lot of people out there are incredibly tense, and they have no way of releasing it, because as you sit down more and more, you're in these bad positions, your body gets tense, your body holds position that you spend your most time in. So if you sat down looking at your phone with a poor posture, your posture kind of starts to kind of calcify around that position, becomes incredibly stiff and tense, and we're not releasing that. It's hard to become relaxed when you're in that sort of a state, and so what happens? Yeah, you're not relaxed. You become anxious, tense. So these 5 areas, just to go over them again: re-socialization and integration within a larger group, the social side of things; non-verbal creative expression for emotional expression. It's non-verbal, we can't talk about it. It's like we move fast, we move slow, we move angrily, we move happily, we move destructively, we move evasively. There's so many different ways of moving. Now, if we're not moving, we can't express ourselves like that. Total self and body awareness and enhanced self-esteem. Muscular coordination, broader movement capabilities. Finally, tension release and enjoyment through relaxation. As you might be seeing, it's quite a broad topic. There's a lot goes into this movement idea. Now, I went into this podcast just thinking about movement as being kind of the building blocks of striking martial arts, and what separates the good from the great martial artists is how well they move. But movement has got so much to do with our development. And as you can see, we're not moving enough, and it seems to be the real cause of issue today. So in general, a holistic integration of emotional, spiritual and cognitive selves with the environment is the goal of dance movement therapy. And so these above categories, they apply to dance class, martial arts and everything else, and any form of movement. How can we integrate with the environment, other people, opponents, teammates, even when we're playing games, It doesn't have to be highbrow, this stuff. It could be very basic. It could be playing hopscotch. It's all movement, isn't it? And so, as I mentioned earlier, it tends to be that most women like to dance. It's very natural for most women to dance. Men maybe don't like to dance so much. Some men love to dance, of course, but martial arts can give people an avenue to express themselves, as we mentioned earlier. And if you're out there and you don't like dancing, you're a chap, if you're a woman, you don't like dancing, martial arts might be the one for you, because it's as varied as dancing. There's a lot of cultural references and approaches to martial arts, and think of all the benefits you can get. You link into a new social group. It gives you a vehicle for creative self-expression, emotional, non-verbal expression. It's really deep down in the blood and bones too, because once you start getting really into this sort of movement therapy, it's beyond thinking about it too kind of abstractly. You're thinking with your body. As we said before, a chance to increase self and body awareness, muscle coordination and release tension. Seems to me that most adults today are missing out on these psychological and physical improvements due to sedentary living. So we're going to look quickly now into some of the research on exercise psychology, on the psychological benefits of movement and exercise. Link these to what we're talking about, because as some of these studies show, it doesn't seem to be the benefits of the exercise which is having the effect. It's sort of correlated, but they're not 100% sure of exactly what's going on. And it's my thesis that movement is the key. Movement's the idea here. So reducing anxiety and depression with exercise. A lot of study on this. So in one London study, exercise was shown to be one of the most effective things to do when feeling depressed. No need to take pharmacological treatments, maybe exercise, maybe movement, maybe, dance, martial arts, all this sort of stuff can really be of benefit. So it was noted in this study that it was correlational. So it was not shown conclusively that exercise affects mood, but exercise was associated with changes in mood. Was movement the reason? Was it because these depressed people weren't moving as much and then they put them through this exercise routine over time and there was a correlation of improved mood? Was it the fact that they were just getting those people moving? They were out of their house. As I say, I think movement's got a big part of this. So it was previously thought that aerobic exercise was required for people to experience the well-being and mood benefits. But more recently, this has been disputed with evidence of the same benefits coming from weight training, which is anaerobic, where oxygen isn't present, so that's like a higher threshold, or indeed yoga. So quickly talk about aerobic, anaerobic. For those that don't know, aerobic exercise is when we can do this for quite a bit of time, and this is when oxygen is present. So if we think about the 400 meters and above, 800 meters, to the extreme, we'll think of a marathon. This is like rhythmic exercise which goes for a long time. This is called aerobic because this is where oxygen is present, whereas anaerobic is a different system, different energy system, and it's more explosive, takes more effort, and we can't do this for long. Sprinting, weightlifting, and so on and so forth. So they originally found that benefit in mood, people were feeling better after the intervention, was from aerobic exercise. So maybe they had people on the cross trainers or running machines, so something over time. But what they found was that anaerobic weight training, so when you're lifting weights, heavier weights, you're entering this anaerobic system as when you're kind of exploding. Your body is exploding. So it's not so rhythmic, it's more explosion, reset, explode again. We can't do this as much, more taxing, but they found that same benefit to mood. But they also found that same benefit to yoga, which is, hatha yoga, things like that, qigong. So what we're seeing is there is benefit to these movements with a big old weight, where we're physiologically really working very hard, or we're working moderately for a longer time, still getting that benefit, or we're working very softly even. And when we're doing yoga, we're getting like deep stretches, but we're not working as anywhere near as hard as the other forms of exercise. It could be quite tough still, yoga, don't get me wrong, but it's working a different system, working differently on the body. But this raise in mood benefits and well-being is working in all three of these, which is what I'm trying to get across here. So these different forms of movement, different intensity, all having a benefit for people's mood. And so when looking at things like this, they look at acute effects, and that happens over a single or short-term amount of exercise, whereas chronic happens over a longer time frame. You can have an intervention which is acute, which could be 1 session, 2, 3 short-term sessions, whereas a chronic sessions, they would look at people over longitudinal studies, which would be, so longitudinal studies is where it's, you might measure someone's well-being levels or mood over a long time, where they do exercise 2, 3 times a week over years. So that would be a chronic, whereas acute is short-term. So the largest effect on anxiety and depression from exercise comes from chronic, as in long-term use. So if you're doing exercise for many years, that's going to have the biggest effect. So 1 or 2 times going to whatever class you're going to go to will have some benefit, but what they find the largest effect on anxiety and depression, remember we're talking about anxiety and depression, that will come from long-term. So the people which exercise long-term, they have more of an effect, greater reduction over time. So it's a lifestyle change. It's not something we do short-term. It's something that we bring into our life and becomes part of our life. So more specifically now, we're going to look at anxiety reduction. So in a meta-analysis study of 27 studies, 81% showed evidence that physical activity was related to anxiety reduction. So the other 19% showed partial support, whereas the 81% showed strong evidence. Further research investigated 158 studies that showed evidence that low-intensity exercise improved affect, another word for mood. Another review of 49 studies using randomized control trials showed exercise interventions to be more effective than other anxiety-reducing treatment. Reduction in state anxiety and depression occurs with aerobic exercise as light as 30% maximum heart rate. So that's quite light. That's not, if we think, obviously 100% maximum heart rate, you are sprinting up a hill, as hard as you can. Your heart's pumping out your neck, Whereas 30%, that's quite a reduced rate, but we're still getting quite a lot of benefit there. Well, working at 30% of maximum heart rate, that's moving around, isn't it? We're skipping around here, skipping around there. That's, if you've ever been to a boxing class when you're shadow boxing, your heart rate's going to increase a little bit from your resting heart rate, but it's not flying up. But this is what I'm talking about. This is why I think movement's so important, because moving around here, moving around there, call it dance, call it shadow boxing, call it form work, whatever you want to call it. Physiologically, our heart rate's not flying up that high, but we're getting these benefits. Reduction in state anxiety and depression, happy days. As I say, does that point to movement being a factor rather than the physiological benefits of the exercise itself? Because the benefits sort of happen after of exercise, don't they? The body responds. So one interesting thing, anxiety reduction occurs in all populations regardless of age, sex, fitness levels, activity levels, healthy or unhealthy, young or old, anxious or non-anxious. So they have done reams of research and they've found that people experience these benefits from all walks of life. So if you're out there and you're not moving too much and you're anxious, maybe this is something you should pay attention to. You don't have to go out there and exercise your heart out, 30% maximal heart rate. That's not very heavy. Learn some light way of movement. Maybe that's going to bring that anxiety level down for you. So looking more specifically at depression reduction and exercise, adolescent males not engaged in organized sport exhibited much more depression, severe depression levels than males engaged in sport. Young males, it seems, adolescent males, they need to be engaged in sport. And in my time, there would be kids who weren't engaging in sport. I'm guessing that number's higher now. There's more. We had computer games when I was a kid, but more kids playing computer games, more distractions now, internet, so on and so forth. So depression is on the rise, from what I gather. Inactivity is on the rise, especially in these adolescent males. Exercise seems to be a key component to that. So exercise produces larger antidepressant effects when the program is at least 9 weeks. More on that chronic side, the more longer term, the benefits are better. Psychologists and psychiatrists rate exercise as the most effective technique for changing a bad mood and is the first approach they would use to energize themselves. Now, some people hate psychiatrists and psychologists, but I would take that point as to be quite important, because a lot of people reach for pills, they reach for this, they reach for that, and maybe people blame psychologists and psychiatrists for doing the same, but this piece of evidence I found quite interesting. Exercise is the most effective technique for changing a bad mood, and it's the first approach you should take. I'd follow the experts on that one myself. So activities as diverse as aerobic exercise, weight training, and Tai Chi, similar as what we've seen before, have been shown to reduce anger, sullenness, resentment, tension, and anxiety. Researchers have stated that mood regulating has 3 interrelated components: changing a bad mood, raising one's energy level, 2, and reducing tension. So there's a bit of crossover from the dance movement therapy we looked at before. Reducing tension, both of those had that. So of all the separate behavioral categories described to self-regulate mood, a case can be made that exercise is the most effective. Now, when I say exercise here, think movement too, because you can't exercise without movement. So this behavior was self-rated and as the most successful in changing a bad mood, 4th most successful in raising energy, and the 3rd most successful at tension reduction. Research shows exercise is related to positive changes in mood states. Little evidence suggests that exercise itself causes the benefits. Again, it is more to do with facilitative effect of movement on mood and well-being. As I say, exercise is one thing, For me, movement is the king, it's the key here. So exercise is related to positive changes in mood states, but little evidence suggests that the exercise itself causes the benefits. We just like to move. It's so obvious to me, but it's just about movement. So here's a list of the things that exercise increases. Exercise has been shown to increase academic performance, assertiveness, confidence, emotional stability, intellectual functioning, internal locus of control, very important for stress management, memory, perception, positive body image, self-control, sexual satisfaction, well-being, work efficiency. So exercise increases all those things. Lots of studies. That comes from a study called The Relation of Physical Activity and Exercise to Mental Health. In that same study, that was shown that exercise decreases absenteeism at work, alcohol abuse, anger, anxiety, confusion, depression, headaches, hostility, phobias, psychotic behavior, tension, type A behavior, work errors. Now, if some wonder drug came on the scene and they said it had all those benefits, it increased all this and decreased all that, you'd be like, really? Really? Well, exercise, stroke, movement, because they're looking at different types of exercise here, but the key takeaway, the key thing is that all exercise takes movement. I mean, you'd snap their arm off, wouldn't you, for offering this? The issue I find is I look around, I go outside, I see people jogging up and down, a lot of them are terrible form. If you're experiencing a lot of these issues and you're like, I'm going to start exercising, find someone who knows what they're doing to teach you. Don't just go jogging because it's free. If you like jogging, fair enough. Most people don't like jogging. I used to hate jogging when I got dragged around. I don't jog now because I don't like it. I'd much rather do sprints than jog. I'd much rather skip than jog. So don't just choose something because it's cheap. Choose something that you're going to stick with and you're going to get the benefits from, because, you're shorting yourself, aren't you, really? And jogging's boring for me. And it has limited benefit. I mean, jogging's still going to benefit you because you're moving around and you do get some benefit, but don't jog on concrete, please. Anyway, so there's the explanations for why exercise is so beneficial. Another word for movement, of course. So there's physiological explanations. So one is the increase in cerebral blood flow. That's blood into the brain. Changes in brain neurotransmitters. So this is the chemicals which are moving around the brain. Endorphins, serotonin. Increases in maximal oxygen consumption and delivery of oxygen to cerebral tissues. The ability to draw in more oxygen and pump the oxygen around, up into the brain especially. Reductions in muscle tension, which we've been talking about a lot today. Structural changes in the brain. The more active you are, actually changes the structure of the brain. Increase in serum concentrations of endocannabinoid receptors. So the psychological explanations too. Enhanced feeling of control. If we don't move, we have a very little understanding of what we're capable of and so on. We're not going to feel like we have much control, but when we're active, we know where we stand a lot better than if we're not active. Feeling of competency and self-efficacy. We talk about that a lot. But we love to feel like we're improving at something we care about and value. We get greater confidence in that. We get a boost, of course. Positive social interactions. Improve self-concept and self-esteem. Opportunities for fun and enjoyment. There's a lot of people out there, there's not so much fun and enjoyment in their life. Or if it is, it's kind of artificial. It's, looking on social media or playing computer games. How about some real activity of your own? Your physical self achieve that goal. And you can't really beat that. Not just leveling up on some cute computer game, but you've leveled up. You've set yourself a goal for doing some activity and you've hit that mark. You've done something you weren't able to do that. You weren't able to do that before, and now you can do it. I mean, nothing can beat that. A computer game is just like a poor version. This is the real thing. So moving over now to, these are all interrelated, but you can see exercise and psychological well-being. So far we've been talking about adults. Research looking into the benefits for children has shown that exercise correlates with higher levels of self-efficacy, so that's confidence to a specific task, perceived competence, how well we think we can do something, increased achievement motivation. People are depressed, they can't be bothered, whereas this increased achievement motivation, people are setting themselves more goals. They want to achieve more things. Higher levels of task goal orientation, mastery goals. So that's self-reference goals. It's not about beating that other person, it's about you getting better at something. Task goals. I am now better at this thing. Ego goal is beating someone external from you. Task goal is a mastery goal. I am improving at this thing that I value. And lower levels of depression. This is in kids. So I'm hoping that it's clear how important this stuff is, because we all love to move as kids, and a lot of us lost it. We lose that. We really need to get back on that stuff before that's taken away from us, So we're moving on to a little section here on exercise, cognitive functioning and personality. Cognitive functioning is how well our brain functions. So in a 1973 study, a fitness program was administered to middle-aged men, and the participants reported the following changes by the end. Increased self-confidence, greater feelings of control, improved imagination, and a greater sense of self-sufficiency. So a further study in 1991 found that aerobic fitness training boosted scores on self-sufficiency and intelligence, and reduced scores on insecurity. Now, one aspect of personality is neuroticism, sensitivity to negative emotion, sensitivity to depression, anxiety, and all these things. Well, self-sufficiency, being more confident and feeling more self-sufficient, is going to have a big effect on that. Even they're showing effects on scores of intelligence. So there's a section 2 on exercise and self-development stroke enhancing quality of life. So self-concept is a term that refers to what we think that we are, and is seen as the most important measure of psychological well-being, closely related to self-esteem and self-efficacy. So self-concept is everything that we think about ourselves. A 1989 study showed that exercise programs are associated with increases in self-esteem. People with lower self-esteem when starting out show the greatest increase. Goes back to what we've been saying. The same researcher went on to qualify his findings, suggesting that changes in self-esteem had more to do with changes in perception rather than changes in physical fitness. Like I'm saying here, you're doing the exercise, but the actual effect of the exercise takes time to happen. The side effect of doing these exercises, this change in perception, the psychological change in perception, it's like, I can do these things, which I wasn't sure I could do, and the upswing in mood. So hang on a minute, what else can I do? If I've done this and I didn't think I could do it, what else can I do? People spend their whole life not thinking about what they can do. So what this research is showing is it's not the effect of the exercise, the benefit of the exercise, it's these other things, elements, which are probably more important. So as we noted in a previous podcast on confidence, that was the last one, episode 6, concrete experience is the strongest source of confidence, be that physical or psychological. So if you do something concrete, that is a great foundation for future activity and exploration. Because if you get out the habit of doing any movement, exercise or whatever, there's just doubt, withdrawal in a lot of people's minds. And then you do something, you go through a course of activity. What else can I do? Because I've done this, I didn't think I could do that, now I've done it. And now you're thinking, what else can I do? And because you've done that previous thing, that's a concrete experience, that's a foundation right there of increased confidence moving forward. And you'd be amazed, I think a lot of us look out there and we think people seem to be confident about what they're doing, but it's not the case. Most people are riddled with self-doubt, and no wonder. Most of them don't do much, they're very, very inactive. They're doing all these things which we know are not so good for us. So I would never assume that all these people out there are confident and doing. This is why everyone's crowning into their phones as they walk along. They haven't got the confidence to walk around and put it away. If they did, we wouldn't have the issues that we have. So further studies examined changes in self-esteem in middle-aged women and found that the changes continued a year after the exercise intervention. So they did a study, a year later the benefits were still being felt. That's how powerful these effects can be. Further studies looked at the changes in self-identity, with participants noting changes in feeling the sense of achievement through exercise, sense of belonging, interaction and self-cognition, thinking about yourself or how they thought about themselves. Exercise has been consistently been linked with positive psychological changes in self-esteem, self-concept and body image. And as I say, these can last way past the intervention. But once you get going, keep going. Find something else. Find something that you value. Is there something you've always wanted to learn? Get out there and do it, isn't there? Because who else is going to do it? So one interesting study found that even though participants had no change in body shape or weight, they displayed an increase in body image after 6 40-minute bouts. Because 6 40-minute bouts might not have you might not lose any weight. Your body's still the same shape, but you can't measure the benefits. As I say, it's the movement, it's not the exercise per se. I'm convinced of that. So I hope we're seeing from this long list of research findings the benefits to movement here. So we're coming to the end of these and then we're going to move on to martial arts specifically. So before we do though, hardiness and exercise. Hardiness is the ability to overcome stress, challenges and disappointment. It's linked with neuroticism on the opposite end, negatively affected. So the following 3 traits are found in people that have hardiness. We could call this being stress tolerant, the opposite of being neurotic. So a sense of personal control over external events. This is linked to being hardy. A sense of involvement, commitment and purpose in daily life. The final one, the flexibility to adapt to unexpected changes by perceiving them as challenges or opportunities for further growth. So if you have all 3 of these, you are considered a hardy person, hardy folk. Some people just, they have challenges for breakfast. They overcome. So research looking into business people found that those that were physically active and hardy were protected against stress-related illness compared with people that have one but not both of these markers. So it's not enough having that hardy personality trait. You need to exercise too. You need to be active too. And exercising on its own is great, but you want to build into yourself that approach, and that can take a challenging thing. Maybe you're not naturally that way, but we can always become better at that. We can start to exercise control over external events through practice. We can become committed and have a purpose in our life, but it might take, for some people it's natural, for some people it takes effort, but it's also can become a habit. And as I say, something unexpected happens, we can start to see that as a challenge to overcome. So the final part of this look into research on exercise/movement and the benefits is cognitive functioning, the functioning of the brain. So exercising seems to be the best thing for the brain according to research by psychologists, neuroscientists and medical doctors. As an example, regular aerobic exercise halves the chances of getting Alzheimer's and dementia by 60%. So Alzheimer's by half, dementia by 60%. So it's not guaranteed, of course, but you're giving yourself a better shot. Now, we know, I've looked at the data and people are getting more and more sedentary, so these Alzheimer's and dementia issues are going to keep going up and up. It's going to be a great burden for society as a whole. But as I say, if you want to protect yourself or lower your chances of getting these things, regular aerobic exercise can do that for you. As I say, movement is the king. In a study with children, 10 minutes of physical activity was integrated into 6 consecutive traditional lessons over a 2-week period. The results produced a boost in intrinsic motivation, doing something because you value it, not seeing it as a trade-off, perceived competence and effort without enhancing perceptions of pressure or negatively affecting the lessons being taught. So 10 minutes of physical activity integrated into these lessons at school boosted intrinsic motivation, perceived competence and effort with no increase of pressure or negative emotion and so on and so forth. Because we see kids now sitting down Well, even my day, you have to sit over an hour. Quite young kids. A lot of kids can't, they can't do that. They can't sit for an hour and 10 minutes and abstractly talk about this. In fact, they need to move. So obvious. Especially these very, very active kids bouncing off the walls. I remember seeing us, because these kids were built to move, because they were not all the same. Some people can sit there and abstractly look at something, and they're more introverted. They can sit and multiply numbers in their head, and they can do this and they can do that, no problem. But some kids, they physically need to be doing the thing. We're not all built to do the same thing. It's obvious. Some people are jumping up and down. They need to move around. Kids love to move. Even the more introverted ones, when they're young enough, they need it to flourish. So obvious. So we're moving across now into martial arts study and these areas. I wanted to get across to you how important these things are before we speak specifically about the movement from martial arts as I see it. So, movement in the martial arts and its benefits. Martial arts can impede the decline of the musculoskeletal system that occurs with aging, and the associated deterioration in functional capacity and increased risks of falls and hip fractures. So Tai Chi is the most researched martial arts style for health improvement. Evidence suggests that it benefits balance, coordination, stress reduction, improved agility, balance, posture control, and lower extremity strength. Like a friend of mine, when we came up together, he was doing the Tai Chi side of the syllabus that we did, and that's all he teaches mostly, Tai Chi with older people in nursing homes and so on. Great benefit, wonderful art. Look at all those benefits, balance, coordination, stress reduction, agility, balance. I've got balance in there twice. Posture control, lower extremity strength, because as we get older, we lose hip flexibility, and that's linked with a higher preponderance of falls. As we get older, our bones thin out. Hip fractures, hip fracture could be us done. Postmenopausal women, they lose a lot of bone structure, fracture their hip, that could be them done. So my grandma, she danced up until late 80s, loved it. I kept her young, moving around. Doesn't have to be complicated. Just going to a dance class a couple times a week, moving up and down, and then practicing that routine, finding a new routine, learning a new routine, and learning a move that you couldn't do before. We need this motivation in life, So Tai Chi intervention study using a cohort of elderly people that had experienced falls and were physically impaired showed evidence suggesting that Tai Chi also showed influence on the CNS ability to control dynamic relationships and interactions between the base of support, the center of mass, and the pattern of coordination between the two lower extremities during a walking balance challenge, central nervous system, and to examine the extent to which individuals are able to improve balance responses despite existing impairments. Because the central nervous system, the muscles are linked to the nervous system that links to the brain. If we're not moving, if we're not using these things, it starts to wither. It starts to drop away. The body works on this system where if you're not using it, it's going to move, it's going to go away. So you've got people, this cohort of elderly people who experience falls, were physically impaired. They go through this Tai Chi study. They were able to improve their control of their interactions between the base of support, the center of mass, so obviously the legs going into the hips up through the core, the pattern of coordination between the two lower extremities during a walking balance challenge. And so what this study found was that the health benefits of martial arts training are multidimensional and difficult to study. I mean, the big takeaway is the benefits are pretty substantial. See, movement has been described as the canvas of the martial artist, as I mentioned earlier. So we're going to move on to my kind of thoughts specifically about martial arts. So we've looked at a lot of research there, a lot of evidence. If you're not convinced that movement's good for you, then I don't know what else to tell you. So movement has been described as the canvas of the martial artist. Punches and kicks are the paint strokes. Master the movement pattern and you master the punch, the kick, the ability to dodge. Now, when you watch some high-level operators, it's their ability to move, to set up their strikes, and to avoid their opponent's strikes, which really sets them above for me. Now, My background is Kung Fu, and one of the styles I have a black belt in is called 7 Animals Shaolin. And this 7 Animals system uses animal archetypes to understand movements, but also psychological profiles. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, funnily enough, my daughter's 3, and for quite a while she understands the difference between a monkey and a tiger. Now, if conceptually you would try to describe their approaches, she'd be lost. But she understands that the tiger is fierce and the monkey is playful. Because these are deep metaphors, and as time goes on, they are genius, because this is how we understand things at a young age, and we understand, these are kind of the building blocks of how we understand things as we go. So the 7 animals, one we'll discard for this discussion, which is dragon, because that is a theoretical approach of melding the other 6 together. So we'll move that to the side for the time being. But we'll look at tiger and leopard. Big cats, both very ferocious, both very powerful, but they both move very differently. So when we're doing tiger form, we're very heavy and deliberate, full power motion. Heavy is the idea. We're looking to use our weight to land devastating power on our opponent. There's no tricks. There's no tricking our opponent with tiger. We absorb their shots. We're reactively defensive. A tiger doesn't think they can be hurt. Theoretically, this is sort of the approach they have. They come in there, they have no fear. They feel like they can take whatever the opponent's given, and the opponent cannot take what they have got to deliver. Balance is important to the tiger. Its weight is set. With leopard is very rotational. Tiger is up to down, where the leopard rotates through. If you compare George Foreman to Mike Tyson, George Foreman, he's not rotating explosively when he's punching. He's much more one and done, whereas Tyson is ripping through with explosive contraction. So these archetypes give us a methodology, a framework to understand movement, because you could say the punches and kicks are affected by it, but it's more the specific movement. Speed, leopard, weight, tiger. Now we could talk about those, but we'll move on to 2 other animals. So crane is a bird that can stand on one leg for hours. It's very balanced, very almost artistic, poised, graceful. Whereas the snake slivers left, slivers right. Rotational like the leopard, but softer. Crane is down to up. It takes off. Crane takes flight. Large motion, literally standing up on one leg. Very big, broad movements, the arms out to the side. Whereas a snake is trying to get down the center and then wrap around like a constrictor. A snake can go right to its target very rapidly and then coil after. Bites and coils is one of the things it might do. But can you see how those styles of martial arts, they move differently, and they can really work together too. Now again, snakes can move very quickly. A striking snake could bite a galloping horse as it runs past a couple times, 3 times, 4 times even. They're so rapid in that engagement. Cranes, they don't move that quickly. They can move gracefully. Large motion. See, a child understands the difference between these. That's why they're such great archetypes. Now the final pair is Mantis, monkey. Now monkey, cheeky monkey, he's rolling this way, he's rolling that way. I mean, who doesn't love the way that a monkey can move around? No human can move as well as a monkey. They can flip this way, they can flip that way, they can roll. They can climb with their feet, for goodness sake. They've got that agility, that coordination, macro coordination. They literally can cartwheel up, and they can hang off a branch with their tail, jumping from tree to tree, grabbing with their feet. So as an archetype, the monkey is incredibly effective for a movement-based style of incredible coordination. Now the mantis is a weird one, because it's literally an insect, looks like a bit of an alien, and that's the idea really. It's strange. It moves in an almost alien fashion. It's got 5 legs, I think, the mantis. So it's moving in different directions. There's that same idea of coordination, a bit softer than the monkey. but it's coordinated nonetheless. Alien-like, insect-like, odd, strange. Now to see those movements in your mind-eye, we've got power, we've got speed, we've got grace, we've got that soft, subtle cunning of the snake, we've got that explosive coordination and acrobatic-like movement of the monkey, and we've just got that strangeness of the mantis. Now things get quite fun when you weave them into this self-expression that we talk about. Some styles, martial arts, they will just take one or two of these. Tiger and crane together is quite common. Think of different forms of karate, taekwondo. They've got a very craney, kicky style. Boxing. I mean, boxing's quite broad too, but you can see that Leopard style. Tyson himself. Lots of rotational power punching. You got some boxers just come out there with big power, straight hitting, or some are very long, almost very pecky, crane style. Some people just come out with a very strange style. Some incredibly elusive. It's not much about the punching and the kicking, it's more about their ability to evade their opponent. And so there's a wonderful set of movement patterns. It's like a language of movement. Now the beauty of martial arts is that you can consistently practice these forever and ever, always looking to improve, integrate these. So as my teacher used to say, out of these 6 animals, 3 will tend to be something you are drawn to naturally, and 3 will not be something you are naturally drawn to, for example. And as I say before, these aren't just movement ideas, they're also archetypes, psychological frames, psychophysiological frames, if you like. But all those benefits we spoke about come from this exploration of movement. When it comes to dance, there's all these different types of dancing. These are just frames. You could think of a form of dancing which is very graceful, other ones which are very subtle. Some are very defined, some big, some small. Now this gives you a framework. So I said before, it's not the master, the level of mastery where you have big power and you can just knock people out with your punching and kicking. The real greats, the best to ever do it, they've mastered movement. And this allows them to set up what they're doing, disarm their opponent. And this is why I love martial arts, because it's just endless. Endless in your approach to improving your ability to do the techniques. So over the years I've thought a lot about movement. It's a pure movement we're talking about now. So if I have a student and I'm taking them through, so I like to teach striking. I've got a background in grappling too, but where I find myself very much comfortable is in the striking realm. So if I have a new student, we separate out the punching and the kicks. We're going to look at that in a future podcast. The movement breaks down into 5 key patterns for me, and this is the real crux of the podcast today. So I wanted to talk about the benefits of movement and as it relates to people which aren't moving enough. But now I want to talk a little bit about my philosophy in martial arts. And you'd be amazed how many people don't apply this even in the professional ranks. So we're going to speak about 5 different movements and why, if you're a martial artist out there, it's really useful to know these. And if you're thinking about getting into martial arts, you really need to know these. Because a lot of teachers won't teach you this because maybe it just hasn't occurred to them. Because they're focused on the punching and the kicking, not the moves in between. So number 1, we're looking at feinting. Now what is a feint? A feint is a false attack. It's a lie. Now an experienced striker, they use a lot of feints. Your roughneck, they don't. They come and show you their hand straight away. Well, you never want to show your hand. Now a feint, when I'm teaching a new student, there's many ways to feint, but at the very basic level, it's a false attack. How do we do that? Well, an attack is when we move forward to attack, of course. So if I'm in my stance with my left foot forward, my standard stance, I'm in an orthodox position, I drive off my back foot like I'm going to attack my opponent. But as I do that, I pretty much straight away drive off my front foot, my left foot back. So I've gone forward looking like I'm going to attack someone, and then I reset, move back. I drive off my back foot, then I drive off my front. Now what's the use of a feint? Well, when we feint, we know what our opponent is looking for, because they're going to show us what they would do, or they'll actually fully do it. And some great champions have built a career on feinting. They come out and they throw 5 feints for every 1 strike that they deliver. This is boxing, this is kickboxing, this is Muay Thai, whatever style you want. This is so critical. And you'd be amazed how many people don't do it. Top level people. But a feint we can use a feint with our shoulder, hand feints, elbow feint with the eyes. We could dip our weight a little bit. Feinting is just fundamental. It's that false attack. We might be going up against someone who's quicker, faster, stronger, more powerful than us. But if we are more skilled at feinting and some of these other movements I'm talking about, we might have all the advantage. Such as it is, there'll be fights where someone is outgunned in all aspects except for martial arts skill. And guess who wins? Tends to be the person with the skill, because it doesn't matter. All this other stuff doesn't matter, does it? Because if I feint and my opponent reacts and they keep reacting every time I feint, they exhaust themselves. So, feinting, number one. We step in, we step out. At its most basic term. We can, on top of that, create more complex patterns, weave them together with other ones. The second one, which I'll likely teach to a new student, is called drawing. And that's a false retreat. It's the opposite of a feint. I drive off my front leg backwards, away from my opponent, with the idea that they think I'm moving away. As soon as I do that, I step in, driving off my back leg. If they lunge in at me, happy days. If they crash into my range because they're not very good at managing their distance, good for me. Now a draw, as I say, is a false retreat. It allows my opponent to open up. When I open up, I'm opening myself up to a counter attack. Now a refined draw moves quite small amounts, but makes a show of it. Now, under Genghis Khan of historical fame, the Mongol emperor, he had a general in his crew, we'll say, called Subutai. And he is considered a genius of battle tactic. And one of the things that he really loved to do, because the Mongols fought on horseback, he would have a group of warriors which were basically actors. And what they would do was a false retreat. They would quake with fear and they would just break and run. This is what they did. And they would just practice looking, rolling their eyes like they were incredibly afraid, and they just run for it. And the not so canny opponents would charge forward. And I remember Subutai came into Europe with 25,000 men, and they came across a Georgian army. Subutai came across raping and pillaging, and then they came across the Georgian army they're all in plate armor or whatever, on their heavy horses. And as the armies came together, Subutai gave the signal, and the front line of the Mongols just scattered and ran. A false retreat. They drew their opponent on. And what did the Georgians do? They charged. Happy days. These Mongols are nothing. They're running from us. So what happened? The Mongols retreated, and they retreated. They were incredibly well disciplined, this army. People consider the Mongols just complete savages. I mean, they weren't very nice to their enemies, but hey, they were incredibly disciplined army, cavalry. And they broke, and then they enveloped their opponent, because it was a false retreat, of course. And they countered and slaughtered their opponents. And he would do this trick over and over and over. This was his specialty. It took a lot of training too, because in battle conditions, if it's not practiced, it's going to fall apart. So they practiced and practiced and practiced. They had it down to an art. And some fighters have this down to an art. They draw their opponent on and they counter. They give that false retreat and they intercept their opponent coming in, maybe, doubling the impact. Now, you could spend a lifetime mastering feinting and drawing together, because individually they're effective, but you can put those together to do even more of it. But moving on. So we've got feinting, we've got drawing, evasion. Now, evasion is a genuine retreat. Now, to evade something, first of all, we need to make distance. If we're trying to be evasive, it's a good idea to have ourselves a square stance where our feet are level so we can move side to side. But if we move side to side straight away, we can get clipped by a big swing. So what do we need to do when we're evading first? We need to do the beginning of the draw. We need to drive off our front leg, make distance between ourselves and the opponent. We drive off that front leg, very much similar to how in a shot put they bend down, they got that shot put on their chest, they explode back, and they turn 180 degrees and they launch that shot put. So if I'm fighting, practicing my evasion, I need to be able to cover distance, explode back. Now I've got a good bit of distance between me and my opponent. Now I can get into my square stance and I can either circle right or I can circle left. As I say, if I circle straight away, I can get clipped, and you'll see it all the time. You also see it that people, professionals of the top level, well, they'll begin to do their evasion, they'll be moving out into space, and then they'll just kind of circle back into their opponent and then get clipped again. Because when you're evading, you want to get into space. You don't want to be getting into a trapped environment, you want to move into space. So now the easiest way to do that when we're evading is to dodge too. A dodge is when we're circling one way, we circle back the other way. So close your eyes for a moment, imagine you've got an opponent ahead of you. You don't like the situation, you want to make some distance, so you explode back away from them, like that shot put thrower. We're out into our lateral stance. It's very easy to explode back and go onto my right when I'm evading, because I'm driving off my left foot to move back, and then I go left foot again when I move to my right with my level stance. If I'm moving to my left, I have to drive off my right foot, a little bit trickier. But as a martial artist, you need to be able to evade an opponent. The greatest self-defense technique in the world is what I'm explaining right here, because if someone can't touch you, they can't hurt you. So the very first thing you should learn as a martial artist is that ability to evade. It means has nothing to do with punching and kicking, even head movement. It's just that simple evasion. And you'll see it in fight. I watch a lot of fights, that's what I do. And you'll see if people are really good at this evasion, they've just got such an advantage over their opponents, because they can just step back, evade one way, evade the other way. It takes effort to drive in on someone, and if you can't touch them, then you have to kind of settle back down again, because you can't explode forward and then like run around, because it takes a lot of energy. So you could be walking home one day and some likely lad decides to want to kind of get into it with you if they've had a few drinks. Well, if professional fighter is going to get tired charging after someone, what's going to be some untrained person who's been out drinking? They are just going to give up, because it's exhausting going after someone who's good at evading, good at dodging. I played American football as a kid, and I was quite good at dodging, running around. So I kind of brought this across when I'm not the quickest, not the most explosive, but I could kind of dodge around, and it's exhausting chasing after someone who's good at dodging. And so evasion is, it's the king of self-defense, because if they can't touch you, they can't hurt you. When we're evading, a dodge, we explode back away from them, we circle one way, they try to cut us off, we dodge back the other way. So we're going from our left to our right in a parallel stance, they charge in to try and catch us, we circle back the other way. As I say, I've seen champions lose their title because they cannot do this. Deontay Wilder never gets into a square stance. I saw Cyborg circling into Amanda Nunes's right hand after being rocked. She couldn't circle away into the open space, recollect herself and get back to fighting. She circled back into Nunes's right hand, got clipped again, eventually got finished. It's remarkable. People whose career is to be a champion. But the problem is, if you in your gym are the biggest, baddest person around and you're never put on the back foot, you're probably never going to have to learn this stuff, this evasion. And evasion, if you're the biggest, baddest, maybe you don't ever learn it until you come across someone who puts you in that position and you need to. Well, I'm telling you, it might be in your life that you'll be in a situation where you need to kind of evade someone trying to come after you, whatever. You need to learn this stuff. Come down. I teach down at Peeps Park in Deptford on Saturday mornings, and this is what one of the things we'll learn is evasion, because it's so important. Keeps yourself safe. So we've looked at feinting, we've looked at drawing, we've looked at evasion. Pressing. How do we press? This is a genuine attack. Now we press in. Just like the feint, we drive off the back leg, we move in. Here though, we can attack straight in front of our opponent, but we're sort of 50-50 here. Maybe I want to hit an angle and attack from an advantageous angle. So I press in on my opponent. I got close now. Now what we do is what we call a clock turn. Now a clock turn just like it sounds. If I use my right foot, I can kind of nudge myself around the clock one step. So if I'm facing 12 o'clock, I step in, I'm still facing 12 o'clock. Now I nudge myself with my right foot, so now I'm facing 1 o'clock. Now I've got an angle on my opponent. Or the opposite could be the case. I can nudge with my left foot, and now I face 11 o'clock. Now when I'm pressing, if I'm moving into the lion's den, I want to be able to get an angle on my opponent. But they're going to change their position when I change my position. So maybe I'll need to change my position again. Now you'll watch people which are really good at cutting the cage or cutting the ring. They're very good at changing these soft angles. They step in on their opponent as they need to do because they need to get close to hurt them. But they're going to create these angles because they want to deliver maximum power. Now again, we're talking about martial arts here, but we haven't talked about striking so much. We're just talking about the movement to set up our strikes. So this episode, we looked at the benefits of movement generally, and now we're looking at the specifics of movement as relates martial art. And you'd be amazed how many professionals do not apply this stuff. So when I'm pressing in, it's like two tanks. If I'm in a position where I can shoot my opponent tank and they can't shoot me, happy days. And this is how it works. If I'm lined up on my opponent and they haven't adjusted because of my effective pressing, think Roberto Duran, modern times think Gennady Golovkin, they pressure their opponent. Takes energy away from the opponent, but they're also keeping themselves fairly safe because they're taking their opponent's angles away, but putting their angles on them. The beautiful thing about this is the feinting, the drawing, the evasion, and the pressing, that all works together. Because I could press, I could land something, then I could draw, bring them onto something, feint, and then I can move in with a real press. This is it's very simple, these four things we've talked about previously, but they all work together in this is the game. If your opponent is coming out thinking and punching and kicking, and you're thinking about these movement theories, you're ahead of the game because they're thinking about the component where you're bringing the whole deal. This is why you can set something up. You can draw your opponent onto your shot rather than just throwing your shot and hoping. So the final one is basing. This is like the dropping of our body weight. This applies to all of the other four above. That dropping of the weight. It could be a duck. It could be drawing our weight down to absorb a strike or our opponent to block something. It's sort of a auxiliary movement that links in to the rest of the other four. Now, this is something I've thought a lot about. It's very simple, isn't it? 5 different ways of moving: feinting, a false attack; drawing, a false retreat; evading, a genuine retreat; pressing, a genuine attack; and basing, ducking down rather. Now, if you ever go to a boxing class and you're asked to shadow box, this is the thing you need to be working on. Not so much the punching and the kicking, it's these movements, because you apply these correctly in sparring with someone, you're going to be able to disarm their best attacks, find the openings in their defense. This is why the best feint all the time. This is why they're able to draw. They're able to evade. They'll be able to press when their opponent's hurt. They're able to apply the base, the duck, the dodge, putting it all together, the integration, and experimenting, putting these together. Now, when we get good at moving these together, trust me, you could take someone who's quite experienced and make them feel, you can make them drown, because they're just thinking about the punches and the kicks. They're just thinking about the letters where you're thinking about full sentences. And you see this over and over and over again. If you're a martial arts nerd like I am, you will see this everywhere. Because some people are just physically gifted. They've got great power. It tends to be the strikers who aren't gifted with power that have mastered this stuff we're talking about. Because they've had to. They don't have the brutal one-punch power. They've had to learn their skill, their craft. So who's a great feinter? Israel Adesanya, middleweight UFC champion. If you want to look up who's a great feinter, he's great at feinting, drawing the opponent's offense out of them, or just freezing them with just an absolute level of feints. Because their opponent might be trying to counter punch, but if you're constantly feinting, it really throws them off. So if you want to look at someone who's really good at that, Israel Adesanya. Drawing, Floyd Mayweather. He gives that false false target, pull counter. He's drawing that jab, he pulls back, throws the right hand, weaves under the left hook. He's made a career out of that. He does it better than anyone. A false retreat. Evasion, who's really good at that? Willie Pep, he's long retired. Is he dead now? He's way back when probably one of the best movers, if not the best movers in the boxing ring. Jack Slack's got a video on him moving around, square stance this way, square stance out, weaving underneath, constantly shuffling. Absolutely tremendous. Pressing, who's a great presser? Gennady Golovkin. Lee Wiley's got a great video on him pressing in, how he mirrors the opponent, walks along, doesn't follow him around the ring. Roberto Duran, great at pressing, reacting, slipping. Well, basing, one of the things that Jack Slack always talks about is Roberto Duran would jab and then be moving, basing, dipping down one direction or the other to draw the opponent out, but through a base, not drawing, moving away. One of his opponents, he was just doing that constantly. A jab would move this way, jab would move that way, jab would duck down, slipping under shots. And as you can see, these are 5 very different movements. I've given 5 examples there, very different people, very different types of fighters. But you put these together, you'll just be so far ahead of everyone else in the gym, because they're just relying on those other tools. So, feinting, a false attack, drawing, a false retreat, evading, a genuine retreat, pressing, a genuine attack, basing, ducking down. So movement and mastery, we talked a lot about this earlier. We've had 2 sort of parts to this podcast. We've looked at the benefits of movement, and then we've looked at the specifics of martial arts movement. Now, mastery and refinement is the name of the game. We'll never master it, but that's what we try to do. See, all physical activities have a set core of movements. See, a lot of disciplines share core movements with each other. Movement as an art form has self-expression. We are looking to improve at what we do. Getting better, not reference to someone else. That's what we talk about as an ego goal. What we talk about achievement goal theory is this idea that there's 2 types of goals. Ego goal, what other people are doing, we don't care so much. It's more about a mastery goal, task-based. I am getting better at moving between those different types of movement. I am more competent at these key movements. Now, it might be you're not interested in martial arts. Pick a dance form. They've got their types of movements as well. Improve at that. Get better at that. Now, mine is obviously martial arts based, and that's why we're talking martial arts movement here. You'll never master it, but moving forward and getting better at that is the way to go. It's what we're aiming at, because it might be you'll need it one day, and you better have it kind of embedded in the body. We've talked about the benefits of movement for stress and anxiety, depression, improvements in well-being, cognitive development. If you've got kids out there, put them in a martial arts class or a dance class, because look at the benefits. Self-esteem is related to this competence. So we like to be feeling like we're improving at something. we haven't even talked also about the ability of a martial artist to move in time with their opponent. With a dance, it's about movement in time with a partner. In martial arts terms, it's an opponent. And that integration, that harmony of moving, diffusing their offense, avoiding what they're doing, pressing them when you need to, thinking about the environment around you too, what rules set you're working within. It's a very deep subject and can go on and on. We're going to start to wind this up now. So one thing, many years ago I had the idea of writing a book about movement, culture, sports, dance, and how these interrelate. And I find it quite interesting, because if you look at something like a country like Brazil, they produce a martial art like capoeira, very coordination based. They have a music and a dance style called samba. And look at the way they play football, or they practice jiu-jitsu. Now, for me, there is a stamp of Brazil on all those things. Very tricky, very coordinated. It's in the blood of those movements. And there's something about movement and culture, because each country in the world has their own stamp of how that movement manifests. Now, I probably will never write that book, but I thought I'd bring it in here because it's quite interesting as we look at movement. Because you watch the Brazilian football team play football, or you could even watch a Brazilian gymnastic team. There's a sense of that culture coming through in their movement. Now, Japan, they practice karate. That's where karate comes from. Jiu-jitsu comes from Japan. Now, I've practiced both Brazilian and Japanese jiu-jitsu a bit. And it's interesting that this is kind of one of the crux of the idea of the book, was looking at how Japanese jiu-jitsu is very linear, goes straight for the target, whereas Brazilian jiu-jitsu is very tricky, very layered approach. It's all about setups, whereas Japanese jiu-jitsu is not much setup, it's just go. So you look at capoeira and karate, couldn't be more different. I mean, maybe there's a couple of techniques which are the same, but the vast majority of kicks in capoeira are very acrobatic. Karate, a bit more utilitarian, does what it needs to do, whereas capoeira, you're going to need to be very, very coordinated, very, very explosive, be able to pull off some of these cartwheel type kicks, whereas in karate, there's none of that cartwheel kick stuff. Front kick, side kick, turning kick. I mean, they would still have their spins and rotations, but capoeira, that's the bulk of what they do. So you can see that there's this kind of cultural stamp on this type of movement, even when they're taking the same sorts of art forms. Culture and movement are very, very interesting and very important. To observe that is quite fascinating for me. I mean, you look at the way, say, a German football team would play versus the Brazilian football team. Germany is about ruthless efficiency. There was that classic example when Germany beat Brazil 7-1. Brazil, they're playing their certain beautiful game, tricky, doing all these skillful things. Germany, they don't play like that. They use pace, they get the ball wide, they're strong in the air, ruthlessly efficient. I find it's very fascinating how those approaches are manifest. And if you were to watch the teams train, even how they warm up would be different. So I think there's a whole load of interesting ideas in cultural ideas and how that manifests in art, movement, and so on. So I just want to touch on that a little bit. Find what works for you. There's so many different ways of moving that we've discovered that it's up to you to find what works for you. Learn a different style which is maybe alien to you. We've seen the benefits of movement. It's worth looking into something, because we all like to learn new things. So the last couple of things we're talking about here I've got listed is movement as meditation. Movement linked to the breath as a method of mind-body integration. Tai Chi is obviously a topic on this. Qigong and so on and so forth. Bagua as a style of internal martial arts. Movement as meditation. We've seen how therapeutic movement is. And some of these art forms take that to the next level. There's a real idea of integrating the mind, the body together, and how powerful that is, because when we don't move, we know anxiety, depression goes up. Some of these forms of dance are very slow and relaxed as well. Some of these Japanese forms you see. So there's something definitely there. There's also movement as transport. Like the fundamental form of movement is transport, moving through space. Now, different cultures and different places in the world have different things. You go to Northern Europe and they ski, they go cross-country with these kind of long skis during the winter where it's all frozen. Climbing, if you're up in the mountains. I've got a friend who loves skating. When she goes out skating, she's got her music going, she's moving here and there, finding the gaps. Some people love swimming. And if these people who enjoy these types of movement don't get to do those movements, they can start to experience this low mood, feeling a bit glum, not feeling so good. They go out and do that thing, and guess what? Their mood lifts up. So all these benefits we listed off in the beginning of the podcast, they're available through these types of moving, transporting ourselves through space. So one way I used this idea was to find a busy place to test my ability to move through space. How did I do this? Was to walk from Tottenham Court Road to Marble Arch at a busy time. Now, for those that don't know, Oxford Street, that is the length of Oxford Street, busiest high street in Europe, and obviously it's full of people. And my thinking was, as I walk down that street, I'm not allowed to run, but you're faced with chaos itself. There's so many people where you're basically forced to find the gaps, and it really. So the act of walking down such a busy street with so many people forces you to yield to the number of people and just find the spaces, reacting to something that is bigger and more chaotic and complex than you are. So you kind of get out of your own head as well, and you're reacting. You're purely reacting, and so you go from in there from thinking for the first few minutes, where's the gaps, to just purely reacting because there's too many people to think. You're just kind of moving through space, and then you come to sparring. You've got a much more simple problem in front of you. You've got one person, and moving in time with that person and finding the gaps is the name of the game when it comes to martial arts. So moving through space, moving through a complex environment and getting better and refining that process, I find is very useful, a very useful thing to do. So it all kind of links back to that idea of movement and refined movement and this whole approach. So yeah. So we'll leave it there today. Thank you very much for listening. This has been episode 7 of the Druid High Performance podcast. Today we looked at movement in several different ways. Movement as therapy, movement as a method of improving our mental health, our feelings of competence in this world. We looked specifically at movement and martial arts, which is sort of the key idea that I have. But it's been a bit of a wild journey, this one, covering lots of different topics. Please like and subscribe and share with anyone who you think might find this stuff interesting. Next podcast, we're moving on to striking specifically. We're into the third triad now. We're looking at martial arts specifically. So number 1, we've looked at movement. Next, we're looking at striking. And we'll be back soon with a short video on confidence. We've just done a new video recently on goal setting and what you can learn from goal setting and Tyson Fury. So check that one out. This is Drew signing off for Druid High Performance Solutions. All the best.